There are moments in the history of the galaxy when certainty shatters, not with violence, but with a quiet, creeping realization that everything you believed was wrong. This was one of those moments. I remember the crucible as it was before the disturbance, perfect, ordered, predictable, a cathedral of evolution suspended in orbit around a dying star, its vast structure gleaming with the triumphs of 1,000 dominant species. Every civilization worthy of recognition had stood upon its platforms. Every victor had proven the same truth. Strength is destiny. I was there as an observer, an academic of comparative evolution, tasked with documenting the biological hierarchies of emerging species. My conclusions, at the time, were beyond dispute. Survival favored size, power, efficiency. The equation was elegant in its simplicity. And then they arrived. Humanity. The announcement itself was met with mild curiosity, nothing more. Their classification drew scattered amusement across the observation tiers. A death world species, yes, but not one of significance. Their planetary data suggested instability, not superiority. Gravity higher than galactic standard, climate erratic, predator density excessive. Such worlds do not produce rulers. They produce survivors. There is a difference. When their representative entered the arena, the reaction was disappointment. She was small. That is the first detail I recorded. Not metaphorically small, but measurably insignificant compared to the titans that had preceded her. Her musculature lacked the density of high-gravity brutes. Her dermal layers showed no natural armor, no visible augmentations, no external weaponry. A murmur passed through the stands, amusement thinly veiled as curiosity. This is their champion? I admit I shared the sentiment. She stood alone at the center platform, exposed beneath the artificial glare of the crucible's twin suns. No defensive posture, no attempt to appear larger, more threatening. She did not display her teeth, did not expand her frame, did not emit any dominance signals detectable across known sensory spectrums. She simply stood, calm, still, observing. That was the second detail I recorded, and the first that unsettled me. She was not looking at the audience. She was studying the arena. Not with a scattered attention of prey surrounded by predators, but with focus, intent, as though she were cataloging variables, measuring distances, calculating. It was inappropriate. The trials began, as they always do, with demonstrations of raw biological supremacy. The Cathar war beasts entered first, towering constructs of muscle and chitin, their mass alone enough to fracture lesser platforms. They performed as expected. Their strength tests registered beyond calibrated limits. Their endurance trials concluded with negligible fatigue. Their dominance displays triggered instinctual submission responses even from distant observers. This was normal. This was correct. One by one, the galaxy's finest specimens reaffirmed the hierarchy: speed beyond tracking, force beyond resistance, precision beyond replication. Each victory was predictable, each result inevitable. And then the human was called. There was no applause, no anticipation, only a quiet shift in attention, the kind reserved for anomalies, not contenders. She stepped forward without hesitation. Again, I noted the absence of fear. No accelerated heart rhythm detectable through standard scans, no hormonal spikes consistent with prey response, no micro-movements indicating readiness to flee. If anything, she seemed focused. The first trial was gravity resistance. The platform intensified, pulling downward with crushing force, levels that had crippled lesser species instantly. Even the stronger competitors required visible exertion to remain upright. The human staggered. A ripple of validation moved through the audience. There it was, the expected limitation.
Her frame trembled, her posture dipping under the pressure, muscles strained, balance faltered. Yes, I thought, this is where reality reasserts itself. But she did not collapse. She adjusted. It was subtle, so subtle that many missed it entirely. A shift of stance, a redistribution of weight. Her feet angled differently against the platform, her spine aligned, not rigidly, but efficiently. Her breathing changed, slow, controlled, measured against the increasing force. The strain did not vanish, but it stabilized. The readings confirmed it. She was not resisting the gravity as others had. She was working with it. I felt the first fracture in my certainty. The trial concluded without incident. She had not excelled, but she had endured. The next test began immediately, reaction speed. Mechanical constructs launched projectiles at unpredictable intervals, each faster than the last. Even elite species failed to evade them all. Perfection was not expected. The human moved. Not faster than the others, but differently. She did not react at the moment of attack, she anticipated it. Her gaze tracked patterns invisible to most. Her movements were smaller, more efficient. Where others relied on overwhelming speed, she relied on prediction. She was not keeping up. She was staying ahead. A second fracture formed. By the third trial, the atmosphere in the arena had shifted. The amusement was gone. In its place, something quieter. Unease, perhaps, or curiosity sharpened into attention. And still, she did not acknowledge the audience. Only the arena. Only the tests. Only the challenge. I began to understand then what I had failed to see. This was not a creature relying on instinct alone. This was a creature that learned, adapted, refined itself in real time. The others were perfect products of evolution, finished, optimized, complete. She was unfinished, and that made her dangerous. The final demonstration of the opening sequence approached, a simple comparative strength display, nothing complex, nothing unpredictable, a reaffirmation of the obvious hierarchy. The larger species would dominate, the smaller would fail, balance would be restored. The human stepped forward once more. The platform activated, and for the first time since her arrival, she smiled. It was not a dominance display, not a threat. It was something far more unsettling. Recognition. As though she had finally found something familiar in this alien spectacle. As though in this arena of perfected strength, she understood the rules better than anyone else. That was the moment my certainty collapsed entirely. Because I realized, with growing unease, that we had made a critical error. This was never a demonstration of strength. It was a misunderstanding of what strength truly is. And we were about to be corrected.
It is a dangerous thing to believe you have already understood a species. The crucible thrives on such assumptions. It rewards them, reinforces them, turns them into doctrine. For cycles uncounted, we have observed, measured, categorized, and every time the outcome aligned with expectation. Until now. The human did not dominate the early trials. That, I must emphasize, is what misled us. She was not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most resilient. Her results, when quantified, fell within acceptable margins of survival, but never exceeded them. Where others shattered records, she merely passed. Adequate, unremarkable, predictable. The audience relaxed. I felt it ripple through the observation tiers like a collective exhale. The anomaly had resolved itself into something manageable, a curiosity, nothing more, a death world survivor performing at the upper limits of mediocrity. The hierarchy remained intact. Strength was still destiny. And yet, I could not look away. Because while the results aligned with expectation, the process did not. Between trials, I observed her closely, closer than protocol required. My instruments tracked micro-adjustments most would dismiss as irrelevant. They were not irrelevant. They were deliberate. Her respiration slowed with each completed test, not from fatigue, but from control. Her musculature engaged differently, conserving energy where previously it had wasted it. Even her stance, subtle shifts in balance and alignment, evolved from one challenge to the next. She was not recovering, she was improving. I replayed the recordings again, again, again. The data refused to stabilize. No species adapts this quickly. Adaptation is generational, encoded in genetic sequences, refined over millennia. Instinct is fixed, reliable, optimized. The Cathar do not rethink their movements. The Veln do not revise their reactions. They execute what they are, perfectly, every time. But the human was rewriting herself in real time. The realization unsettled me more than any display of brute force could have. Because strength can be measured, strength can be countered, but this was variance, unpredictability, evolution accelerated beyond comprehension. The next trial was introduced under the designation of cooperative navigation, a scenario designed to evaluate interspecies coordination under environmental stress. Multiple competitors would enter a shifting terrain field, its surface reconfiguring without warning. Platforms would rise and collapse. Pathways would emerge and vanish. The objective was simple: reach the central node. Cooperation increased survival probability. Competition was discouraged, but not prohibited. The assemblies assembled at the platform's edge. Among them stood a dominant apex species, the Graaltech. I had studied them extensively. Towering, massive, their bodies engineered by their world's brutal gravity and constant predation. Their limbs alone carried enough force to fracture reinforced alloy. Their instincts were honed for one purpose: dominance through overwhelming physical superiority. They did not cooperate, they tolerated. The trial began. The terrain shifted violently beneath them. Segments tilted, collapsed, reformed. The weaker species hesitated, calculating, adapting, seeking stable routes. The Graaltech did not hesitate. It surged forward, direct, unstoppable. Its path was not efficient, but it did not need to be. Obstacles were not navigated, they were crushed. Platforms buckled under its weight, but its momentum carried it across before collapse could claim it. Predictable, effective, dominant. The human entered the field last. She did not rush, she observed. Again, that unsettling stillness amidst chaos. Her gaze traced the movement patterns of the terrain, not reacting to changes, but anticipating them. Her steps followed a rhythm, almost hesitant at first, then increasingly precise. She moved differently, not through force, through timing. And somehow, she kept pace. Not ahead of the Graaltech, but not falling behind either. She navigated paths that did not exist until the moment she stepped upon them, used collapsing platforms as leverage rather than obstacles. It was inefficient, it was imperfect, and yet it worked. The Graaltech noticed. Of course it did. A species built for dominance cannot ignore something that refuses to fall behind. Its movements grew sharper, more aggressive. It adjusted its trajectory, not to optimize its path, but to intersect with hers. I recognized the pattern instantly. Territorial response. She was not a threat, but she was an irritation, and for apex predators, Irritation must be eliminated. The collision was inevitable. A narrowing platform forced convergence. The humans stepped forward at the same moment the Graltech advanced. For a fraction of a second, they occupied the same space. The outcome should have been obvious. It was. The Graltech struck her with casual force, a lateral shove delivered without full engagement, not an attack, not even an effort, a dismissal. Her body lifted from the platform, thrown aside as though she weighed nothing. She impacted against a lower segment, sliding across its surface before coming to a halt. The laughter responded exactly as expected. Laughter, not cruel, but assured, the kind of reaction that follows confirmation. The hierarchy had reasserted itself, order restored. I began to record the event as a standard outcome. Human subject displaced. Dominant species maintains positional superiority. It was routine, predictable, correct. But then, she did not remain down. At first, I thought it was residual motion, an attempt to stabilize after impact. Her limbs shifted slightly, her body adjusting against the platform. But then she stopped, and slowly, she pushed herself up. The laughter faded, not abruptly, but unevenly as realization spread across the stands. She rose to her feet, not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. There was no panic in her movement, no urgency, only intention. I felt it then, something I had not experienced in all my cycles of observation: unease. The Graltech had already turned away. To it, the interaction was over, the obstacle removed, the path clear. It advanced without hesitation, its focus returning to the objective. The human stood behind it, still, breathing steady, posture aligned, changed. That was the detail that froze my thoughts entirely. She was not standing as she had before. Her stance had shifted, lower, more centered, balanced not for movement across unstable terrain, but for something else, something deliberate, something prepared. The Graltech continued forward, unaware, unconcerned, certain, and the human stepped forward again, not rushed, not reckless, but with a calm that defied every predictive model I possessed. This was not persistence, this was defiance.
There is a precise moment when dominance ceases to be assumed and must instead be proven. I witnessed that moment unfold in silence. The arena did not erupt, it did not react as it had to countless displays of superiority before. Instead, a tension spread, thin, sharp, and suffocating, the kind that precedes collapse. The human stood her ground. That alone was enough to disrupt expectation. The Graltech turned fully now, its massive frame reorienting with deliberate menace, its upper limbs extended outward, increasing its apparent size. Dermal plates flared, reflecting the artificial light in blinding flashes. Low-frequency vibrations pulsed outward from its core, signals designed to trigger submission responses in lesser organisms. I felt them, even from the observation tier. A command, encoded in biology itself: yield. Everything about the Graltech demanded obedience. It was evolution distilled into a singular directive: dominate or destroy. The human did neither. She did not retreat. She did not submit. She adjusted. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Her stance lowered, center of gravity dropping closer to the platform. Her feet aligned with calculated precision. Her arms shifted, not defensively, but in readiness, prepared. I searched my archives for a comparable behavior. I found none. This was not instinct. Instinct reacts. This anticipated. This was training.
a concept rare among apex species, unnecessary when dominance is assured by biology alone. Why refine what is already perfect? And yet, here she was, refined, focused, ready. The Graltech advanced, not with careless dismissal of before, but with intent. Its movements were slower now, heavier with meaning, each step a declaration, each vibration a warning amplified. It would not tolerate defiance, it would correct it. The human remained still, watching, measuring, waiting. The strike came without further warning, a sweeping motion of its primary limb, fast, overwhelming, unavoidable by conventional metrics. It was not designed to kill, not yet. This was a demonstration, a lesson, a reminder of the natural order. The force behind it could shatter reinforced structures. It should have ended the confrontation. Instead, something impossible occurred. The human moved, not away, into. Her body rotated at the precise moment of impact, not to resist the force, but to meet it at an angle. Her hands made contact, not with the full mass of the strike, but at a point of transition, a pivot, a redirection. For a fraction of a second, physics itself seemed to hesitate. The Graltech's limb did not stop. It slipped, deflected. Its own momentum carried it forward, past its intended target. The human stepped with it, not against it, guiding, turning, transforming the overwhelming force into imbalance. Gasps rippled through the arena, not loud, not unified, but undeniable. This was not strength. This was something else entirely. The Graltech roared. This time the sound was different, no longer a warning, a declaration. Its entire frame expanded, every muscle fiber engaging at maximum capacity. The ground beneath it fractured as it lowered its stance, preparing for a full-force charge. This would not be a demonstration. This would be eradication. The arena recognized it. Even the most detached observers shifted, their attention sharpening to a singular point. This was no longer a trial. This was a confrontation. The human did not retreat. Again, always that same defiance, but now I understood it was not defiance born of ignorance. It was decision. She knew. She understood the disparity, and she chose to stand anyway. The Graltech launched forward. There was no subtlety, no restraint. Its mass accelerated with terrifying speed, every step compounding its momentum. The ground beneath it buckled beneath the force, fractures spreading outward like cracks in reality itself. Nothing could withstand that impact. Nothing should even attempt to. Every predictive model I possessed reached the same conclusion. She would be destroyed. And yet, she did not move away. That was the final impossible detail. She did not flee, did not evade, did not attempt survival through distance. Instead, she stepped forward, into the path of annihilation, into the certainty of overwhelming force, into the attack itself. And in that moment, as the laws of strength and survival collided, I realized we were no longer witnessing a contest of biology. We were witnessing something far dangerous, because she was not trying to survive the attack. She was preparing to use it. She moved into the attack. There are events that defy prediction, and then there are events that erase the very concept of prediction itself. What happened next did not belong to any model I had ever constructed. Time slowed. Not literally. No distortion field had been activated, no temporal anomaly detected, but perception itself fractured under the weight of anticipation. Every mind in the arena, from the lowest observer to the highest analytical intelligence, arrived at the same inevitable conclusion. Impact. Destruction. Conclusion. The Graltech charged with the full authority of its evolution. Its mass accelerated beyond safe thresholds, each step compounding force into something catastrophic. The platform beneath it splintered, unable to fully absorb the energy being unleashed. This was not movement. This was inevitability. The human stood in its path, still, centered, waiting. I remember focusing on her eyes, not wide with fear, not narrowed in desperation, but locked, fixed upon a point that did not yet exist. She was not watching the creature, she was watching the moment, the precise instant where everything would converge. The Graltech closed the distance, 1 step, 2, 3. Each impact sent shockwaves through the structure, reverberating across the arena. The air itself seemed to recoil, displaced by the sheer force of its advance. No organism of her size could withstand what was coming. No structure of her composition could absorb that level of energy. There was no scenario in which she survived. And yet, she moved. Not away, never away. At the final possible instant, when escape was no longer an option, when impact had become unavoidable, she pivoted. The motion was minimal. That is what made it incomprehensible. A slight rotation of her body, a shift of her footing, a realignment of her center of gravity so precise that it bordered on impossibility. Her hands rose, not to block, not to resist, but to meet. Contact. For a fraction of a second, the universe held its breath. Her hands connected with the Graltech's forward limb, not at the point of greatest force, but at its transition, the exact moment where acceleration became commitment, where direction became irreversible. She did not stop it. She could not. Instead, she guided it. The force continued forward, exactly as intended, but no longer in the direction it had been aimed. Her body moved with the momentum, not against it. Every muscle, every joint, every angle aligned in perfect synchronization with the incoming mass. She became a conduit, not a barrier, a channel through which the Graltech's own power flowed. And then, the impossible. She lowered her stance further, anchoring herself not through resistance, but through balance. Her grip tightened, not with strength, but with timing. Every variable aligned in a singular, fleeting instant. Leverage. It is a simple principle. Even the smallest force applied correctly can move something far greater. But this was not simple. This was perfection. The Graltech's momentum lifted, not entirely, not cleanly, but enough to break contact with the platform, enough to remove certainty. Its massive form rose, just slightly, just briefly, but undeniably. I could not process it. The data rejected itself. Mass calculations failed. Structural tolerances collapsed into contradiction. There was no equation that allowed for what I was witnessing. She was lifting it, not through strength, through understanding, through timing, through something learned, refined, passed down across generations of a world that demanded survival through ingenuity rather than dominance. For a single impossible moment, the hierarchy inverted. The predator was no longer in control, and the human was. Then she turned. The motion was fluid, continuous, a seamless extension of everything that had come before. The redirected force did not dissipate. It compounded, spiraled, converted into rotation. The Graltech's owning velocity became its undoing, its massive frame now committed to a trajectory it could not correct. And with a final, precise exertion, she completed the motion. She threw it. There is no other word, no more complex description, no alternative interpretation. She threw it. The Graltech's body left the platform entirely, its mass carried by the momentum it had generated, its balance irreparably compromised. It crossed the boundary of the arena in a blur of motion, too fast, too sudden for recovery. For a brief instant, it hung suspended against the void. Then it fell. Down, into the abyss that surrounded the crucible, an endless expanse of nothingness designed to ensure that those who fell did not return.
The impact never came. The sound never reached us. It simply disappeared. Silence followed. Not the quiet of anticipation, not the stillness before reaction, but absolute, total silence, the kind that occurs when comprehension fails. Thousands of species, millions of observers, countless intelligences, biological and synthetic alike, all reduced to the same state, inability to understand. I felt it within myself, a void where certainty had once existed. My models, my frameworks, my entire understanding of evolutionary hierarchy collapsed in an instant, because what I had witnessed was not an anomaly, it was a contradiction. Strength had not prevailed, size had not dictated outcome, dominance had not ensured victory. Something else had, something we had never accounted for. The human stood alone on the platform. Her chest rose and fell with controlled intensity, breath heavy but steady. There were signs of strain, micro tears in musculature, elevated stress markers, the undeniable cost of what she had just executed. But she remained standing, unbroken, victorious. She did not celebrate, did not raise her arms, did not acknowledge the arena or its countless witnesses. She simply exhaled. And in that moment, I understood something that terrified me more than the act itself. This was not desperation, not luck, not a final reckless gamble for survival. This was intention. She knew. From the moment she stepped into the path of the charge, she knew exactly what she was going to do. The realization spread through me like a fracture through glass. If this was deliberate, if this was repeatable, if this was something her species understood, then everything we believed about power was incomplete, because the human had just defeated a superior predator without possessing superior strength. And as the silence of the arena stretched into something unbearable, a single question emerged, unbidden, undeniable, and deeply, deeply unsettling. If a human can do this, what else are they capable of?
Order did not collapse all at once. It unraveled. Slowly at first, subtle fractures spreading through the systems that had governed the crucible for millennia. Analytical streams flooded with conflicting data. Observers broke protocol, speaking out of turn, questioning results that had already been recorded and verified. Impossible, incorrect, unrepeatable. These were the initial conclusions. They did not last, because the evidence remained. The Graaltech was gone, and the human still stood. I watched as the arena struggled to recalibrate, not physically, but conceptually. The very foundation upon which this institution had been built was no longer stable. Biological superiority had always been treated as an absolute, a measurable constant that defined hierarchy. Now it appeared incomplete. I turned my attention fully to the human, no longer as a curiosity, but as a problem. Who or what was she? My access privileges expanded as I initiated a deeper investigation. Archives opened, data streams converged, the history of her species unfolded before me, not in fragments, but in overwhelming totality. And what I found was chaos. Her world, Earth, defied categorization, environmental instability at every scale, temperature extremes capable of erasing entire ecosystems, atmospheric violence, tectonic violence, seasonal fluctuations that transformed landscapes into entirely different worlds within predictable cycles. And life endured. Not just endured, competed. Predators of every scale, from microscopic entities that invaded the body itself to massive apex hunters designed for pursuit, ambush, and overwhelming force. There was no single dominant form, only constant conflict, constant adaptation, constant survival. I searched for the defining evolutionary advantage. There was none. Humans were not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most resilient in isolation. Individually, they were inadequate, and yet they persisted. No, more than persisted. They thrived. The pattern became clear only when I stopped searching for perfection. Humans had not evolved to dominate a stable environment. They had evolved to survive an unstable one. Every weakness compensated, every limitation addressed, not through biological superiority, but through innovation, tools, strategy, learning. Their evolution did not stop at the genetic level. It continued externally, cumulatively, exponentially. And in that realization, the events in the arena began to make sense. The human was not an outlier. She was a representative, a product of a species that did not accept its limitations as final. I shifted my focus back to the crucible. The trials had resumed. Protocol demanded continuation, even in the face of anomaly. But something had changed, something subtle, yet undeniable. The competitors were no longer performing. They were watching her. The human moved through the next sequence of challenges with the same measured precision. She did not dominate. She did not overwhelm. She adapted. Where others relied on instinct, she analyzed. Where others applied force, she applied timing. Where others followed established patterns, she broke them. And most unsettling of all, she learned. I observed it in real time. Each trial refined her movements further. Each challenge reduced inefficiency. Mistakes were not repeated, they were eliminated. She was not merely surviving the crucible. She was studying it, exploiting it. There was a trial involving variable terrain displacement, unpredictable shifts designed to destabilize even the most balanced species. Competitors stumbled, recalibrated, struggled to maintain footing. The human anticipated. Not perfectly, but increasingly so. Her movements aligned with the rhythm of the environment, as though she were listening to something others could not perceive. She fell once, only once, and when she rose, she did not fall again. Another trial introduced multi-vector threats, simultaneous stimuli designed to overwhelm cognitive processing. Even advanced neural structures exhibited delay under such conditions. The human hesitated, briefly, then adapted. Her responses became prioritized. Not all threats were treated equally. Some were ignored entirely, calculated risks taken without hesitation. Efficiency replaced caution. Progress replaced perfection. She advanced, always forward, always learning. The other competitors began to change, not in performance, in behavior. Hesitation. It appeared first as micro-delays, fractions of a second where none had existed before, then as altered trajectories, subtle shifts in positioning designed not for optimization, but avoidance. They were accounting for her, not because she was stronger, but because she was unpredictable. They could not model her, could not anticipate her responses, could not rely on instinct to counter something that did not follow instinctual patterns. And so they hesitated. For apex species, hesitation is weakness, and weakness is fatal. I felt the implications cascade through my consciousness. This was the true disruption, not that she had defeated the Graaltech, but that she had introduced uncertainty into a system built on certainty. She had redefined strength. It was no longer a fixed attribute, no longer a measurable constant. It was dynamic, contextual, evolving. The human was not the strongest entity in the arena, but she was becoming the most dangerous. because she improved, continuously, relentlessly, under pressure. I returned to her species data, searching for confirmation, for limitation, for any indication that this capacity had bounds. Instead, I found a pattern repeated across their entire history. Adversity did not weaken them, it refined them. Conflict did not destroy them, it advanced them. Failure was not an endpoint, it was information. They did not avoid pressure. They transformed under it, weaponized it. And in that moment, a realization formed that eclipsed all others in its significance. The crucible was designed to test the limits of a species, to push them to the edge of their capabilities, to expose weakness, to define hierarchy. But for humans, this environment was not a test. It was a catalyst. Every challenge, every threat, every escalation was making her better, faster, more precise, more dangerous. I observed her as she entered the next phase of challenges, her movements already more refined than before, her posture more efficient, her awareness sharper. She was not approaching her limit, she was moving beyond it. And for the first time since my assignment began, I felt something I could not quantify. Concern. Because the implication was unavoidable. The more the arena pushed her, the more dangerous she became.
There are trials designed to measure capability, and then there are trials designed to break it. The Crucible saved such a test for last. Even before its activation, the arena shifted, not physically, but atmospherically. A silence fell once more, heavier than before, layered with anticipation and something deeper, reluctance. Because every species present understood what was about to unfold. The final trial was not a contest, it was a verdict. The platform expanded, its structure reconfiguring into a vast, enclosed environment. Barriers rose, sealing the participants within a contained ecosystem, one engineered not for balance, but for collapse. A planetary death simulation. No single species had ever completed it alone. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most resilient. It was designed to overwhelm all variables simultaneously, to strip away advantage, to expose the absolute limit of survival. And one by one, species had always failed. The human stepped forward. No hesitation, no visible calculation, just movement. That alone should have unsettled me. But by now I understood. She did not hesitate because hesitation had never served her kind. The environment activated, instantly, violently. Temperature fluctuations struck first. Extremes oscillated without pattern, searing heat followed by freezing collapse. The terrain responded in kind, shifting beneath her feet, cracking, reforming, collapsing into unstable fragments. The air itself turned hostile. Toxic compounds flooded the atmosphere, forcing biological systems into immediate distress. Visibility dropped as particulate matter thickened, obscuring pathways, distorting perception. Every variable was against her, every condition lethal. Other competitors lasted seconds. Even the most dominant species, those built to endure extreme environments, began to falter. Their adaptations, so perfectly suited to specific conditions, failed when those conditions changed faster than they could compensate. One withdrew, then another. Survival instinct overrode ambition. This was expected. This was correct. No organism willingly remains in an environment that guarantees its destruction. Except the human remained. She moved forward, not blindly, not recklessly, but deliberately. Her pace adjusted to the instability of the terrain.
When the ground fractured, she did not resist, she flowed with it, redistributing her weight, finding balance in motion rather than stillness. The temperature spikes affected her. I saw it in the data, stress responses escalating, cellular damage accumulating. Her skin flushed under heat, tightened under cold. Her body was not immune, it endured. She altered her breathing pattern as the air thickened, taking shorter, controlled inhales. When visibility dropped, she slowed, not to stop, but to recalibrate. Adaptation. Always adaptation. Then, something new. She began to use the environment. Fragments of broken terrain became tools, leverage points, shields against shifting winds, anchors against destabilizing forces. She tore sections free, repurposing them instinctively, not as extensions of strength, but as multipliers of efficiency. No species had done this before, because no species had needed to. They were already sufficient. She was not. So she changed the equation. Pain registered across her entire system. There was no masking it now. Her movements, though precise, carried the weight of accumulated damage. Micro-injuries compounded, fatigue set in, her body approached thresholds that should have forced withdrawal. But she did not stop. I searched for the signal, the biological imperative that compels retreat under unsustainable conditions. It was there, active, demanding cessation, and yet she overrode it. Not suppressed, not ignored, overridden, consciously, deliberately. This was not survival instinct. This was will. Other species had withdrawn because they could not continue. The human continued because she chose to. The distinction was profound. Time lost meaning within the simulation. The environment did not stabilize, it intensified. Each phase layered additional variables, compounding difficulty beyond any measurable scale. And still, she moved forward. Slower now, weaker, but never stopping. Her body began to fail. That is the only accurate description. Muscle response lagged, coordination degraded, energy reserves depleted beyond sustainable limits. By every known metric, she had already lost. And yet, she continued. Not with the efficiency of earlier trials, not with the precision that had defined her advantage, but with something else entirely. Determination. Raw, unrefined, unyielding. Each step became an act of defiance, each movement a refusal. The final objective emerged at the center of the collapsing environment, a fixed point amidst chaos. No competitor had ever reached it alone. It stood now within her reach. She stumbled, fell to one knee as the terrain shifted beneath her. For a moment, just a moment, I believed it was over, that the limit had finally been reached, that biology would assert itself, that survival instinct would prevail. She did not remain down. Again, always again. She pushed herself up. Her movements were no longer efficient, no longer controlled, but they were enough. Step, 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 each one slower than the last, each one heavier, each one unstoppable. She reached the objective, not in triumph, not in dominance, but in defiance of everything that should have prevented it. Her hand made contact. The simulation ended. Instantly. The environment collapsed, systems disengaging, the hostile conditions vanishing as though they had never existed. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried understanding. The human stood at the center of the platform, barely. Her body trembled under the weight of what it had endured. Her breathing was now uneven, no longer controlled, no longer measured, but she remained standing, unbroken. And in that moment, the crucible learned. Not through data,
not through analysis, but through observation. Humanity does not win because they are stronger. They win because they refuse to lose. I felt the truth of it settle into every fractured model I possessed. Strength can fail, speed can falter, endurance can be exceeded, but refusal has no limit. The implications spread outward, beyond the arena, beyond the crucible, beyond even my own capacity to fully comprehend. Because if a species exists that does not accept defeat, then what does that mean for a galaxy built on hierarchy? I watched her as she steadied herself, as the systems prepared to conclude the trials, as the observers remained frozen in collective realization, and a final question formed, inevitable, unavoidable, and deeply unsettling. The galaxy must now decide, are humans competitors or something far more dangerous?
The crucible did not end. It echoed. Across transmission relays, through diplomatic channels, into the core networks of civilizations that had never before questioned their place in the hierarchy. One moment replayed endlessly. The human standing, the Grell-tech falling, the impossible made real. What followed was not unity, it was fracture. I monitored the response as it spread, faster than any biological contagion. Councils convened in emergency session. Strategic intelligences activated dormant protocols. Entire governments shifted from observation to reaction within a single rotation. Fear, I discovered, travels quickly when certainty dies. Some demanded immediate containment. Their logic was simple, flawed but understandable. A species capable of overturning biological hierarchy could not be allowed to integrate unchecked. Their unpredictability alone posed an existential risk. Models projected long-term instability, disruption of established power structures, collapse of centuries, millennia of evolutionary order. Neutralize the anomaly before it scales. That was the prevailing argument. Others disagreed. They saw not a threat, but an opportunity. A species that could adapt this rapidly, learn this efficiently, endure this completely, such a species could redefine the limits of survival itself. Alliance, they argued, would not weaken the galaxy, it would strengthen it. Integrate the anomaly, learn from it. The divide was absolute. Containment or cooperation. Control or coexistence. I was tasked with delivering a formal assessment, an objective conclusion derived from direct observation. For the first time in my existence, I found objectivity insufficient, because what I had witnessed could not be reduced to metrics alone. Still, I began. Humanity is not a threat by nature. The statement alone triggered immediate resistance across multiple channels. I allowed the reactions to stabilize before continuing. But it is a threat by potential. Silence followed, measured, focused, listening. They do not conform to established evolutionary models. They do not rely on fixed advantages. They do not remain static under pressure. They improve. I transmitted the data, every trial, every adaptation, every recorded instance of deviation from predicted behavior. They will surpass every known species, not through physical evolution, but through innovation, through iteration, through will. There was no argument against this, because the evidence was already undeniable. And yet, I paused, because this was the part no model could fully capture. There is an alternative outcome. Attention sharpened. If left unchecked, humanity will disrupt the hierarchy. A statement of fact.
But if engaged, if understood, I accessed deeper archives, fragments of human history I had only begun to comprehend. They do not fight for dominance. Confusion rippled through the network. It was a contradiction. Everything in the crucible suggested otherwise. So I clarified. They fight for each other. Silence deepened. I continued. Their greatest strength is not physical. It is not even adaptive. I transmitted visual records, moments not from the arena, but from their world. Individuals placing themselves in harm's way for others, enduring loss, persisting through impossible conditions, not alone, but together. It is emotional. The word itself carried weight, unfamiliar, underestimated. They form bonds that override self-preservation, loyalty that defies logic, sacrifice that cannot be modeled within standard survival parameters. I allowed the implications to settle. A human will endure for themselves. A pause. But they will become unstoppable for someone else. That was the difference. That was the variable no system had accounted for. The crucible had tested strength, endurance, adaptation, but it had revealed something far more significant: connection. The human in the arena had not fought for dominance, not truly. She had fought because stopping was not an option she accepted, because somewhere in her biology, in her psychology, existed a refusal not just to lose, but to fail what she represented: her species, her people, herself. The crucible was not a test, I concluded. It was a revelation. No one spoke. No system interrupted. For once, the galaxy listened. Because the conclusion was no longer theoretical. It was inevitable. Humanity would rise. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something far more disruptive, a species that redefines the limits of what is possible and forces everyone else to confront their own limitations in comparison. I ended my report with a final assessment, one that carried no uncertainty. The decision before us is not whether humanity will change the galaxy. A pause. That outcome is already in motion. Another. The decision is whether we stand beside them. The silence stretched, heavy, inevitable. Or one day stand against them.
History does not remember quietly. It reshapes, refines, elevates moments beyond their origin until they become something more than truth, something permanent. The event in the crucible has already begun that transformation. Across the galaxy, it is no longer described as a sequence of movements or a convergence of variables. It has been given names, titles, interpretations shaped by the limitations of those attempting to understand it. The throw, the inversion, the fall of the Graaltech. Each retelling alters the details, exaggerates the impossibility, assigns meaning where there was none intended. Some claim it was a miracle. Others insist it was an anomaly, an unrepeatable convergence of chance and circumstance. A few, more perceptive, recognize it for what it truly was, a demonstration. But even they misunderstand, because it was never about the throw. I have reviewed the recordings more times than I can quantify, frame by frame, variable by variable, not searching for the moment itself, but for what preceded it. The shove. That is where the truth begins. The dismissal, the assumption, the certainty that the human would remain where she was placed, beneath, behind, irrelevant. That was the true test, and she failed it. Not by falling, but by refusing to stay down.
That is the detail no retelling captures accurately. They focus on the impossible act, the lifting, the turning, the fall into the abyss. But those were consequences. The cause was simpler. She stood up. Again. After being overpowered. After being dismissed. After every observable metric confirmed that she should not continue. She chose to continue. That is humanity's power. Not strength, not speed, not even adaptation, though that alone would be enough to destabilize the galaxy. It is defiance, a refusal to accept limitation as final, a refusal to accept hierarchy as unchangeable, a refusal to remain down. The human has already departed the crucible. There was no ceremony, no acknowledgement of victory beyond the recorded outcome. She did not remain to witness the reaction she had created, did not engage with observers or attempt to define the narrative. She left as she had entered, quietly, without spectacle. For her, the event held no greater meaning than the action itself. She had been pushed, she had responded, and then she had moved on. This too is important, because it reveals the absence of something we once believed essential to dominance. She did not seek validation. She did not require recognition. She did not need the galaxy to understand what she had done. She understood it. That was sufficient. I have incorporated this observation into my final analysis, though I suspect it will be dismissed as philosophical rather than empirical. It should not be, because a species that does not require acknowledgement cannot be controlled through it. A species that does not seek dominance cannot be predicted by those who do, and a species that refuses to remain down cannot be contained. The legend will grow. It will be studied in academies, debated in councils, dissected by those who believe understanding it will grant them advantage. They will miss the point. They will search for the technique, the leverage, the precise alignment of variables that made the impossible possible, and they will fail. Because the throw was not the lesson, it was the result of the lesson. The true lesson is far simpler, far more dangerous. Humanity do not accept defeat. Not completely, not permanently. You may overpower them, you may outmatch them, you may even break them. But if there remains even the smallest capacity to rise, they will. And when they do, they will be different, sharper, more capable, more dangerous than before. This is not speculation. It is pattern. It is history. It is inevitability. I conclude this account not with analysis, but with warning, because the galaxy has seen what happens when humanity is underestimated. It has witnessed the consequence of dismissal, the cost of certainty. If this lesson is ignored, if humanity is once again measured by outdated standards of strength and hierarchy, then the outcome will not be confined to an arena. It will not end with a single fall into the abyss. It will spread, escalate, reshape everything. And the next time a human stands, it will not be because they believed they wouldn't. It will be because something, somewhere, believed they would. If that moment comes again, the galaxy will not survive the lesson.